Welcome, Mutts, to the Cadaver Dogs podcast. I am Devin Shepard.
I'm David B. Jacobs.
And we, as I said, are the Cadaver Dogs. I changed up the intro this morning, guys. That's what I'm gonna do.
It's what we
It's a
do.
fresh
Yeah.
pod. What
Why
up?
would we keep anything consistent ever? Consistency is not what we're about here.
No, you could say it makes life dreary and dull.
Yes.
Maybe a foreshadow to what we're talking about today.
We don't want to be codependent with our intro.
Oh, there you go. But I would love to be codependent with our special guest as I'm How's that intro, Joe?
Joe's just shaking his head like, how could
Like,
you?
what
This
am
is
I doing? Why
amazing.
am I here? Joseph Hernandez is an actor and filmmaker and film festival programmer. We're continuing our love for Brooklyn horror this week, guys, because Joe is a programmer at the Brooklyn Horror Film Festival as well as South by Southwest. Joe, so excited to have you on.
Likewise, thank you for having me. It's taken a little bit, but like I told you backstage, I'm really happy to finally be doing this.
So if you guys have heard us constantly referencing Brooklyn Horror in like every other episode, this is Joe.
Hey, what's up?
He's the one that makes it good. No, we really have been having so many guests on that we've met at the film festival. And as a programmer, Joe, you are kind of at the forefront of so many independent filmmakers' careers. I mean, this is putting a lot of pressure on you, I'm sure, but like making or breaking them as you watch the film so early on, which I think is one so fitting for the films that we talk about today, as they are independent slash, if you want to consider them art house films, but also just in general in the horror genre, a really exciting space because I feel like that's where so many independent and art house films really thrive. So one, wanted to thank you there, but also, yeah, just like kind of give our audience a little taste on your mindset and where you're coming from, because I know you watch a million movies every single week.
So, like that responsibility that you're talking about is not something that I take lightly. I think it's something you have to really handle with care. And yeah, as being an arbiter in a way, a curator, and where programming is telling audience members, these are the movies that you should watch, these are the movies that you should give your time to. And a lot of times, it's like the first stepping stone for that film's journey across the fest circuit, but throughout its entire life. So that's a really heavy responsibility, and so many factors go into that. You have to weigh not just the easy things like quality, but also voice and potential and representation, and there are so many factors that if we're not considering, we're failing at our job. Ultimately, that means that you're turning away a lot more than you're choosing, and it's very hard to make a movie. And no one wants to be a dream killer, but that's the job, and I just try to do the best I can with it.
Yeah, I definitely respect that. I mean, David and I, having been both on the side of being able to screen at film festivals and being rejected by film festivals, so it's nice to hear the humanity behind it a lot of the time as well.
It's the worst part of the job.
Yeah, I'm sure. But you specifically, what you do not only on the programming side, but I see you fostering this great community, one that, we've brought on this pod several times, but you do bring filmmakers together, and we've made so many friends because of you specifically, which is kind of really cool to say, actually.
That's so lovely. Over the last couple of years, my attention has shifted away from building up Brooklyn Horror as exclusively as a film festival, because I feel like it's in a good place now and the growth now is just kind of out of our hands at this point. But the next thing I felt I could do was keep the energy and all those interactions and meeting potential collaborators and all that kind of all that kind of networking that happens at the festival why should we just limit it to October, when the festival goes on? This should just be a year-round thing and help make these possibilities be more frequent and allow everyone to be in each other's lives more. We all get so busy and it's easy to check off the festival on your calendar and then a whole year goes by and you haven't touched base with people, you haven't connected, you haven't fostered those individual relationships since then. And yeah, the community focus became like the next mission statement. And I'm glad that if I'm able to affect even a few people's lives through this, that's the big win for me.
Thank you, and beautifully said. We're going to learn more about you and your background and why you're such a dear friend later on in the show. But I do want to move us into the first episode. Before we do that, speaking of short films, very special announcement from our own David B. Jacobs.
Yes, hello. For the past few months, I have been telling you guys about my own short film, Pillow Talk, which is just 5 minutes long. It's about a man who wakes up next to a strange woman who may or may not be human. And if you'd like to find out whether or not she's human, you can watch it right now on YouTube. The link is in the description. Go check it out. It's a ton of fun. Leave a like, leave a comment, give us your own bone ratings and your own overindulgent analysis like we do on the pod. And I hope you like it. Unless you're going to give it like one bone, then just leave a like on the video and move on.
And as a person who did not work on this film, I can say, as I have every time, it is a beautiful short. So please go watch Pillow Talk.
Thank you, Devin.
You're welcome. Supporting, that's the topic of today. Supporting or using, let us see. Let's bring us into the very first film. David, throwing it back to you.
Dwight and Jesse live with their younger brother Thomas. They take care of him, they sing karaoke together, they play the electric organ to test each other's knowledge of music, all within the confines of their small house in the middle of nowhere. Thomas is not allowed to leave the house during the day, or ever for that matter. Therefore, his older siblings need to deliver the food he requires to live fresh human blood. Dwight picks up homeless men dumpster diving, an immigrant with nowhere to go. But even after all this time, each kill leaves Dwight more and more shattered. He wants to leave to go to Miami. He has no real life for himself, his only escape being the time he spends with a prostitute, until Jesse chooses the prostitute for Thomas's next meal. As Dwight is increasingly avoidant of his responsibility as the hunter, even keeping one man locked in secret for days and killing him only when he tries to escape, Jessie now takes it on herself to do the hunting. But Dwight still can't leave, she needs him. Thomas, the younger brother, doesn't really understand. He has the mind of a child who has likely always been sheltered by his siblings. The sun would burn him, but he can hear kids playing right outside the door. He doesn't understand why he can't go out at night, why he can't have friends. Jesse simply forbids it, so Thomas pours out his blood dinner, an act of vengeful spite against his protector. But Thomas's desire for friendship has won out. He's found a way to invite over one of those kids who plays outside, sending a note in the form of a paper airplane. As Thomas shows him around the house, Dwight comes home and flips. No one is supposed to know that Thomas exists, but as Jesse comes home as well, Dwight shoves the kid into the closet, the same closet which she immediately goes for. The kid, scared straight, stabs Jesse in the stomach and runs off. Jesse instructs Dwight to go after him, but that he knows too much. Instead, Dwight drives the kid home. He doesn't have the heart to kill this child. As Jessie bleeds out, she catches her blood in the bathtub, instructing Thomas that it must not be wasted. But Thomas doesn't want to drink his own sister's blood. Even though they argue, they do love each other. Now just the two of them, Dwight tells Thomas through the doorway that he's leaving and never coming back. For a minute, this holds true. He gets as far as the diner before turning back. And so, as the sun looms high, he hugs his brother close, and his brother tells him to open the window. In a tender and heartbreaking scene, Dwight obeys, allowing the sunlight to burst in and fill the frame. Thomas is dead, Dwight is free. This is My Heart Can't Beat Unless You Tell It To, written and directed by Jonathan Cuartas.
So, what really struck me, I'm pretty sure from like frame one, was the beautiful cinematography done by Michael Cuartas, who is the brother of the director. And I wanted to start us off there because I think specifically wanted to start us off with the 4:3 aspect ratio, which is something that Well, at one point was unique, and now I feel like everyone's fucking using it, not in, like, a bad way, but it is a very deliberate decision
Shooting
to
my
use
next film on
4-3.
4-3, Devin.
I
Thanks.
just did a film on
Calling
4-3,
me out.
so but there's a deliberate choice, I think, behind that, and I wanted to see if you guys had an interpretation of that, aspect ratio or, any other aspects of the cinematography and how they reflect the story presented in the film.
Well, I think aspect ratio is another tool that filmmakers use to present a subliminal description of the character's world and mindset. And I think tightening the frame is a great way to depict claustrophobia, or trapped within circumstances could be more what's going on here. It's not like an excessive kind of slap you on the head kind of use here. I think it's subtle enough, but makes all the sense in the world why this choice was made. It's very intimately shot. A lot of the natural lighting adding to the whole grounded feel of the film. It's not, it's as there's as little supernatural stuff going on. Like, I mean, the vampirism is treated as like an illness. There's no super strength, there's no superpowers, nothing going on there. It's more like this kid is sick, and you have older siblings strapped with the responsibility of caring for someone who can't for themselves.
Just to reiterate, so 4-3 is aspect ratio. What we mean is like the resolution of the movie. It's what shape the frame is, and so we're talking about how it's like very square-y, how it's like looks like a square instead of a rectangle. It's technically still a rectangle, but it's a more square-like rectangle.
Squarey.
Um, Square-ish. And yeah, I agree with everything you said, Joe. For me, it's a very intimate frame. I often call this the superior aspect ratio, which I am like half joking when I say that. I really I think movies just look prettier in 4-3. But also there's a lot of like frames within frames that they keep framing characters through doorways, through windows, and it builds that claustrophobia even more. It's the frame itself is literally a house. Like
Mm.
you're putting them in a box, and it also creates this feeling of like secrets that with all the frames within frames shooting through doorways and whatnot, it feels like something is being hidden, like we are a fly on the wall that just gets to watch what's happening and we're being let in on the secret.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything you guys have been saying. Don't really have much to add other than I think you both addressed it perfectly. You said secrets, David, and that actually brings me to the next point that I wanted to discuss because, yeah, this family does have a huge secret, which is their brother who can't even go outside. I don't even think anyone knows that he exists. I'm not sure. But the secrets thing got me thinking specifically about the Gothic genre and made me question, is this film a Gothic film? Now, we covered Gothic as a genre in our earlier episode on The Innocents and the Haunting, and we talked a little bit on what the tropes or what the themes of the Gothic genre typically are, one of them being secrets, one of them being specifically tied to a place, which, most of the film takes place in this house, and usually in Gothic horror, it is a house. Obviously, there are vampires in this movie. Vampires are very Gothic. There's frickin' organ music. I would say that's pretty fucking Gothic. And then I think there's also themes of economic downturn, which I do wanna touch on later on, but feeds into my argument on why this film is a Gothic film. Did you guys feel this was a Gothic film, or what kinda genre do you feel subgenre do you feel this fits into?
I love this. So in the episode where we covered X and Friday the 13th, probably be referencing that again. Rob Pacercia, our old third co-host, who some of you may remember. Remember Rob, everybody? He pitched the idea that X is a neo slasher, and I was so confused by this term, but I feel like it kind of applies here, that if you want to think of the gothic genre as being set in specific time periods in like the big luxurious mansions or whatever, then this might be that neo gothic where it's taking all of these themes and ideas that are introduced in the Gothic literature, including vampirism, and it's taking these ideas and condensing them into a much smaller house. Even the 4:3 aspect ratio, you could say, is calling back to like the older Gothic movies from the 1930s and 40s, like Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre and Rebecca and all those. So I guess I say yes. This movie is, it's not what you think of when you think of as Gothic, but I think
Right.
it fits really well and in an interesting way, and it has an interesting conversation with those Gothic movies.
I had the same thought as David because watching the movie, I didn't get gothic vibes, but then all those tropes you listed, Devin, really sold me on the possibility, and I was like, has neo gothic been coined yet? Like, is that a thing? So that's
Let's
great
coin it
that
here right now.
I'm so glad you launched into that because that was exactly the thought I had. Like,
It's like taking the ideas of Gothic film and literature and moving it into a setting that you wouldn't really associate with that.
We all can assume this film is talking about vampirism, though it's never explicitly said. There
Yes.
are a lot of key elements that make us believe that Thomas is suffering from vampirism or a vampire-like illness. What do you feel like was the pros, I guess, of using the vampire lore in this film to elevate the themes and elevate the story?
I think it makes it more enticing for genre fans. I mean, bearing that a little bit within a an iconic and traditional horror genre creature just makes it more spicy. Everyone, everyone loves a good vampire story. I mentioned this before, but just the grounded approach also made it more interesting.
Yeah.
There were no superhuman or fantastical elements to it. It was really like
Yeah.
it made it seem like an illness that could exist.
Which isn't that scarier?
Yeah, it's scarier and it adds part of the canon that isn't contributed to enough. I think we're
Yeah.
seeing it a little bit more frequently now. I think Flanagan does it amazingly well also with Midnight Mass where he's treating it
Woo!
like there's a very scientific and biological explanation to what's
Mhm.
Yeah.
going on.
It's like a
Humanizing the monster.
and like a deconstruction, I
Yeah.
think, that it's taking all these tropes that we know so well, and we're used to, like you said, the superhuman vampire that jumps around, it can fly, and is so incredibly strong, and it completely demystifies that. It refuses to glorify what's happening, and it's a disease where he's not immortal. He can die just from not having enough blood. I mean, there are some elements that we're not sure about. Like I'm unclear on his age, although I think he's actually the age that he presents as because he seems very young.
Yeah.
But I mean, we can definitely question that. He's a lot younger than his siblings, which could mean anything.
Yeah, a lot of questions, a lot of secrets again.
Yes.
The age thing was one thing that I part of the vampire mythology was this arrested development. And
Hmm.
while it's physical, historically physical in the vampire mythology, it does feel emotional or developmental here with
Hmm.
Thomas's character because he does feel like a little kid. I mean, David, in your summary, you mentioned the paper plane, and all he wants to do is like hang out with other children. And he
Yeah.
does act a lot younger, which made me question what his age is. But I agree. I think he's older than he acts.
Gotcha. I think that makes sense and is quite likely because yeah, we're used to vampires being immortal and not aging. And
Right.
just the fact that he is like 10, 15 years younger than his siblings is it obviously there are siblings with that age gap in real life, but it makes it feel more possible that he's just not aging.
Some other mythologies, vampirism is a dependency. Vampires are dependent on blood, as we mentioned, in order to survive. Unfortunately, most of the time it's also killing, dependent on killing to survive. We do also have these roles of familiars in vampire mythology who are
Hmm.
dependent on their master in a way, the master being the vampire. And then, of course, my favorite is that vampires are literally blood sucking, which is
Yeah.
dependency, often used to describe
I feel like
dependency.
it's not usually addressed what happens if they don't drink blood. Like, it's almost shocking to
True.
hear, like, "Oh, no, he would just straight up die," and it's like, "Oh, is that what it usually is?" And I think it's not. I think Renfield does it the same way as Buffy, that they just
Yeah.
get a lot weaker and they're, like, extremely hungry, but they won't actually die. They'll just, like, live in torture, essentially. Dracula, I don't think it's specified what happens if he doesn't drink blood. Yeah, it's treated much more like a chronic illness.
Yes.
There is an element of the blood of the siblings being like forbidden because there's the one part where Dwight gives his blood to Thomas and Thomas is like, "Is this your blood?" And it's kind of a weird scene.
He must suffer an immense amount of guilt. Like he sees
Mm.
what his siblings have to go through to help him. And I think if it became that they actually had to hurt themselves to feed him, that's where he would draw the line. It's like him asking, "Oh, is this your blood?" And like he does not want that to be the solution ever.
Mm. I like
Right,
that.
yeah. And that's ultimately I can see that is why ultimately Thomas is pushed to want to go outside and to find these other kids and to, risk not only his life, but his family life to make contact with somebody else because he can see yeah, the question of why now, why is he reaching out now to other beings is exactly that, Joe. It's that he's starting to see how this is really starting to affect his brother and sister and wants to be able to have a life where he doesn't have to depend on them so much, where he doesn't ask them of so much, and it really is unfortunate that adds to the tragedy of the film.
So then that kind of ties into the next question we have here, which is who do you guys think is the monster or the villain of the film? Or is there one?
I think that Dwight and Jesse, because of their circumstances and choices that they're making, have become monstrous.
Hmm.
I don't think they are, black and white a monster, but they're doing monstrous things despite the good intentions. They've crossed a point of no return where they are behaving like terrible people.
Yeah, I agree, and I really do question, though, is, like, what their choice is in all this because I think the film doesn't present enough choices for escape for Dwight and Jesse, almost to the point where it feels like they somewhat choose this life and how what I was saying before in terms of, like, not allowing Thomas to go out and play with other people. I feel like there could be a solution there of, like, well, can you, respect Thomas and teach him to not say certain things and to keep certain secrets. I feel like there's a balance there, but instead they go a little too far on the side of restrictiveness rather than finding this balance between allowing Thomas to have an independence as well as them supporting and loving him and keeping him alive. And that can come because they, as you said, Joe, they are also suffering. This is not easy for them, but there are solutions to find that balance that I feel like we don't see them taking or trying to take.
Well, they're trying so hard not to get caught as well with the
Yeah.
things that they're doing. You brought up secrets before, and like that goes into the kind of people they choose to to kill or harvest for blood. But their fears are kind of proven right when that kid comes in and like the first thing Thomas does is like, "Here, try this cup of blood." It's amazing. I do think that they're battling against two choices. It's live this kind of life or let him go.
Yeah, with that moment with the blood, I mean, we were talking about Thomas's Arrested Development. Also, I think just the fact that he hasn't had outside exposure has made it so he doesn't really know how to interact with the world, that he doesn't have that skill set because he's never had to. He has only ever really interacted with his siblings, and maybe if they used to have parents around, maybe there were parents as well at some point. And that's why he immediately with the kid also starts playing their electronic organ game where it's like, guess what year this came
Right.
from? And the kid is like, I don't know, that's really specific.
Right, and I am putting a lot of pressure on Jesse and Dwight in particular because those are the characters that we see in the film.
Yeah.
So when you're saying, yeah, he doesn't know how to interact, I'm like, well, why didn't Dwight and Jesse teach him? But you're right, we don't know. It could be left over
Yeah.
from whatever house and lifestyle the parents started them out with, and now they're
Yeah.
stuck because this is all they know.
And also when I'm realizing we don't know how he became a vampire. We don't know if
Right.
he was bitten or if he was born this way or what. We also don't know what would happen if they didn't keep him a secret. Like, is this a world where people know that vampires exist? Is there an expected reaction if they knew that he was a vampire? Is there a way to treat him? Like, we literally don't know. We are not given that information. It is a very contained story, so we can't say really if it's necessary to keep him hidden.
Yeah, you're right. The one thing that did, I'm not going to say bother me, but the one thing I noticed in this film was, Dwight is our main character. He's
Hmm.
painted a little bit in in an empathetic way. We can relate to him and we feel bad for him. Thomas obviously as well. I did not feel that way with Jesse. Did you guys also not feel empathy or sympathy for Jesse?
I'm glad we're getting into this. My first watch, I would agree with that more. On my rewatch, I feel much more bad for her because she is, to answer who the monster villain of the film is, Jessie is kind of the villain, that she
Right.
is the one who is antagonistic. She is the one who says, no, we need to keep doing this. Dwight is like, I want to get out. I don't think this is healthy. Thomas, while a fucked up little kid, it's hard to blame him for his actions. Jesse is the one who says, you cannot go outside even at night. Jesse is the one who says, no, Dwight, you need to keep doing this. Jesse knows that Dwight is seeing this prostitute and still goes to kill her anyway.
Yeah.
Almost like she does it to spite him. Like, how dare you have an outside life? And she's mean to them. She's always arguing with them, and she tells Thomas how stupid he is. But like, she's the villain because she accepts their situation. Because Dwight and Thomas have not accepted their situation, and Jesse sees this is our responsibility. This is what our life is. When she dies in the end on this watch, I was thinking, wow, she had no fucking life at all.
But we never see her want or dream of another life.
I don't think she allows herself to.
But do we ever see herself not allowing herself to? I think
Yes, yes.
okay.
There's a moment, I almost put this in my summary, but my summary was too long, so I cut it out. There's a moment when she is starting to do the hunting, and we don't know if she's ever done that before. I get the impression that she maybe has at some point, but not really. She seems a lot more tropey in the way that she goes about her killing. That she's very like, this is how I think it's done. And there's a part, she's a waitress at the diner, and there are these two customers who are really annoying and are like dicks to her. I forget how. And then she
They
starts to
tell her to smile more.
no, yeah,
You
they
should
tell
really
her
try
to
to
smile
smile.
more. Oh my god. So then she starts to follow them. And we see that she's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna kill these two annoying assholes who told me to smile. Fuck them. And then she just hears the sirens and like panics and goes away and finds some random homeless person instead. That she like has that moment where it's almost like she recognizes her place. Like she wants to be able to assert herself, but she can't because that would get her caught. And it I mean, obviously she shouldn't kill those two people either. She shouldn't kill the homeless person either, but
I'm still waiting for the part where I'm supposed to feel bad for her though, or like
I
relate to her.
I think the reason that she's colder also is because Dwight has been doing the hunting. So for her, it is more abstract, and she doesn't need to see the humanity in all these people. That I don't think she sees humanity in people
Mhm.
because I don't think she's had the chance to get out there either.
That's a good point. I mean, she doesn't see these people like begging Dwight for their life, or talking about their tragic history, or the acts of kindness and stuff like that. I mean, well, she does get that from the sex worker, lets her into her motel room, like, sure, you can use my bathroom,
Which
like,
is a vampire trope.
uh, yeah, good one there. I didn't catch that one.
Invites her in.
But yeah, she's kind of accepted this like matriarch role and leading this family unit and kind of losing herself in the power of that too. I mean, she makes big power moves to make sure that everything goes according to how she says it should go. We're not diverting from this plan. You know, I don't care how you feel or whatever. This is what needs to happen because I'm in charge of this family.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think that specifically I'm excited to talk about as a point of comparison with our next film because that's such a huge thing is the look
Yes.
and the restraints or the opportunities of being a matriarch of the family. One thing that I saw was constantly present in the film is not only the restraints that are put on the family because of the illness of Thomas, but also the way that they're restrained because of their economic status. We see them struggling a lot. Dwight has to sell things to the thrift store. I think Jesse's the only one that's working. It does seem like they are very limited in what they can be doing in their lifestyle. And well, before I go into to the analysis, I am curious what your guys' take on was why this was ever present in the film. What is the importance of that storyline being in the film?
Yeah, all of their victims are people at the absolute bottom of the social class, economic class rungs. And they talk about as like these are the people who no one will care if they're gone. No one will notice that they're missing if any no one really knows them. And it's true of them as well. And they don't say that explicitly, but you realize at some point like Jesse dies and then Dwight goes to the diner and there's just some other waitress there. Like they didn't even notice that one of their employees just got killed.
And we assume no one even knows that Thomas exists. So
No one will notice if they all just disappear. But those are also the same kind of people who they are hunting down. And I think that's really sad.
it is. Yeah, it's a weird power dynamic situation when we see them struggling, but then there's people who we assume have it worse off because they're so easy to pluck.
Yeah, I saw it as like them choosing people who were least likely to have connections, people that would look for them, and all in this effort to stay hidden and not be caught. This assumption is kind of challenged too, with the sex worker because no, like the Dwight obviously would care if she was gone. And then also, I think there's this twisted mind trick they're playing on themselves, thinking that they're doing less damage by killing
Hmm.
these people.
Yeah.
In the beginning, you hear Dwight tell the homeless man, I'm just trying to help. It's a guard that they put up to make themselves feel a little less worse about what they're doing.
It's like an assertion of importance. It
Yes.
like they're like, "Oh, we're doing this to keep our brother alive. Therefore, our brother is more important than all of these other people combined."
Exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, and that's the power struggle. It's really depressing.
What about the way they bleed them too? It's like they're it's like the way a hunter bleeds out an animal or a
Yeah.
butcher, like the cutting them in the spot to catch the blood in a bucket. Like it's very inhumane.
And then just burying them in the backyard with I don't even think they put grave markers or anything down. It's just here's a hole in the ground.
And maybe this is also what Dwight is starting to question that that the people that they're hunting are animals and we are humans, so we matter and they don't. And Dwight is starting to see the fallacy in that. He's seeing like I don't understand why we would be more important and also seeing all of these other people's stories. Sometimes he's even projecting like there's the bit with the immigrant who I think is an illegal immigrant, but I'm not sure about that. But there's a part where he has a photo in his wallet, and Dwight is like, "Oh, is this your son?" And then we have subtitles, and we see that the immigrant Eduardo goes on a whole monologue about how, like, no, that's not his son. That's someone who was supposed to help him when he got to America, and then just disappeared and did not help him. But Dwight doesn't speak Spanish and just continues thinking that this is his son and like, oh, and this is a father, and I can't kill a father. It's like this complete lack of communication that's so interesting, and it further dehumanizes all of them because they can't even speak to each other.
That killing is so much more important for Dwight because he does make the choice of, even though I know he has family, I'm choosing to take him away from his. And that's part of the, I guess, Dwight going on his search for independence is that killing of Eduardo.
Also, Eduardo comes into their house when he breaks free. I like he could have just ran away. He was like, I gotta
I
stop
know.
these people. I'm like, dude, you got out. Run. Go. I he might not be able to go to police. But you go, just get out of here.
Yeah, he fucked up.
Yeah. Don't be a hero.
Well, before we move on to our next film, I wanted to ask if there were any final thoughts on.
I have one thing. It's really quick. And this happens when Thomas is trying to play the music game with the other boy. And he asks him, would you like to play a game? And like, I just can't hear that without thinking of Jigsaw. I was
All the
just
doors and
wondering if
yeah.
I was alone in that. Probably.
Next time I watch it, I will think of it.
Would you like to play a game?
Yeah, because like when Tobin Bell does it, he's got like this gravelly,
Yeah.
like old man voice, and then you have Thomas Owen, who like is speaking into like the softest, most like timid, like, would you like to play a game? But I still thought of like, oh, that doesn't sound good. That
You have
sounds like
been
too messed
bound to this electric chair, and in 60 seconds it will go off and
up.
burn you to a crisp. But is a way out because you can cut yourself and drain 3 gallons of blood for me to
Oh my god.
drink in that time, and then it will go into this little bucket that will release a lever, and it will stop the chair from electrocuting you, and then you'll be able to leave. But leave the blood, please. That's for me.
Live or die, make your choice.
Okay, I feel like I'm gonna have so much to say about this next film. I want to take a break just before we start analyzing it. Joe, we have heard a lot about the way that you approach programming and about your life as a programmer, but I also wanted to talk about your life as an actor and a filmmaker because that is the other part of your world and why you are able to bring such great, insightful wisdom into the analysis of these films. Did you start? So you started as an actor, correct?
Definitely, that was the initial dream. I took an acting class, a dramatics class in my high school, and that's where like I caught the bug. I had done like plays earlier in life and stuff, but I didn't feel the same way I did after I took that dramatics class. I felt like it was something I could do. I went to Brooklyn College right after that, majored in theater, went to like a Meisner Conservatory, the acting studio, built some chops up there, and started acting in little small things and whatnot. But life kind of took me in another direction. I ended up working in the legal sphere for 10 years before I found my way back to the film industry and took a hard left with the film festival work. And that has been so enriching to my life, and has turned out to be like an amazing pathway back to acting now, with all the knowledge that I've gained, all the people and the incredibly talented artists that I've met along the way has just been incredibly inspirational, and I feel like I'm more prepared now to pursue this goal of mine, and I have more tools at my disposal now than ever before. So I find myself now back to pursuing acting and filmmaking. It just feels more possible than ever before. So yeah, I'm back working on my first directorial effort in like a decade. And
Ooh.
I'm really excited to prove to myself what I can do.
Is it a short film?
It's a short, yeah.
Horror?
It's an erotic vampire short.
Ooh.
So not My Heart Can Be Not. I love that. I feel like it's such a relatable story and weirdly enough is very topical for what we're discussing today, but that
A little more optimistic, I hope.
well, that's what I'm saying. It's more inspirational and optimistic, and I'm glad that we're talking that it, like, fits in here because our next film is not so optimistic and inspirational. But relatable because I feel like, yeah, in the creative space, there's this pressure to, like, constantly need to be working in it or need to be doing something in it where, like it's inspirational to see that, like, you can go off and live a life that is not in the creative arts and then come back to it with just, like, more vigor, more optimism, more honestly, like, probably a skill set that you wouldn't have gotten if you had kept going forward, and I think, like, it's just as all filmmakers here, we as the part of the conversation, we all struggle in some sort of way to find our place in the creative worlds, and it's hard to find the optimism sometimes, you know?
Well, I left out the part that I went back to college and switched my major to film
Hmm.
and really dove into film history and filmmaking because I really also wanted to just like finish what I started. I didn't feel good about leaving school early and not having a college degree and all that. So while I was working at the law firms, it was helping me pay my way through my return to college and everything. But once I graduated, I was like, it's now or never to make that change. This is no longer serving me anymore, this career, and it's not anything that I ever set out to do or wanted. But I was able to leave that behind and get to a place now where everything that I do, any work that I have, it all revolves around film. I'm able to live a life now that completely revolves around the world that I want to be a part of and that gives me the most joy and happiness.
Nice.
It's beautiful. I'm curious if you ever get burned out from watching movies because you've seen so many and your whole life revolves around films. Like, how? How do you do it, Joe, and not burn out from watching movies?
No, film burnout is real.
Mm.
It lasts for like a couple days. Like I would I would compare it to how, let's say you're attending a film festival and it's really intense. You're trying to fit in, 3, 4, 5 movies in a day. I've done 6 and it's a lot. So when the festival's over, you're like, "Woo, I need a break." But then like 3 days later, you're like going to the multiplex to catch the new Scream film. Like you just like and you're
Right?
excited.
I think you're lucky. I think it's hard for people to find that balance when their hobby becomes their job, you know? I have one more question for you and particularly sparked because the last film, My Heart Can't Beat Unless You Tell It To, the director based it off of a short that he did that went around the circuit. And I'm just curious, like, your views on I don't want this to be like a broad question of like your views on shorts, but maybe just like specifically what are some really amazing shorts that you've seen recently that you've fallen in love with or wanna recommend or
And you don't need to flatter me by including my short in there.
No,
No.
I would rather take the broad question because I mean we all know how expensive it is to make movies, especially feature films. Short films, while also very costly, are a more achievable thing to start out with. It's a training ground. It's the first opportunities you get to sharpen your voice and your style and what your stamp is going to be, and you can experiment with things, discover things. I mean, short films are essential to the development of any filmmaker. You don't just launch yourself into a feature with the expectation that, oh, it's going to be great because I'm great. Like, no, like, this is an art, and any kind of art takes years and years and years of practice and honing and discovery. So while there is no blueprint to find success in this industry, there are certain things that you have to do in order to develop and learn. In my position as a programmer, I get to see those early sparks. I get to see something, and maybe it's not fully there yet, or it's a little rough, but like you're seeing what is to come, what can be. It's really tough to make a concise and effective short film.
We have talked up the Brooklyn Horror Film Festival so much on this podcast, but they do have a really great shorts program. So anyone that is able to go, please go check it out. But Joe, specifically for you, if we'll put links to everything in the show notes, but please shout out where people can find you and your work and what you're currently doing.
I tend to post occasionally on my Instagram, official Joe Show, and you can follow me on Letterboxd. Same deal, official Joe Show. I'm not super active as of late, but whenever I have something to promote, be it through Brooklyn or South by, I'll probably be promoting a lot of South by stuff since we're about to launch. Festival is March 8th through the 16th, so right around the corner. Maybe uh, tomorrow if you're listening to this. But yeah, I post a lot of updates there, and as I start making more progress with my personal films and stuff like that, I'm sure I'll do some shout outs there too. So yeah, follows are appreciated.
And all these links will be in the description. So, Devin, you want to get us started with the next movie?
Hell fucking yeah, I do. She's a star. Well, or she wants to be. David's dying now. Sorry. It's 1918. World War I is still raging in Europe, and the Spanish flu has taken a hold of the United States. Pearl is living a quiet farm life, which she finds all too restricting. Her father is paralyzed and thus relies on Pearl and her mother to not only take care of him, but the farm as well. Pearl's mother, a German immigrant, finds pride in the responsibility, but Pearl dreams of a bigger life. She wants to become a dancer, like the ones she sees in the pictures. One day, while visiting town to grab her father's medicine, Pearl meets a young bohemian projectionist who encourages Pearl to take advantage of life. But under the circumstances, she doesn't find it so easy. An opportunity presents itself when a dance competition comes to town. Pearl tells her mother of her plans to audition, throwing her mom into a rage, and as they fight, her mother gets too close to the fireplace and catches fire. I guess this is another opportunity that has presented itself to Pearl. Pearl throws her charred mother in the basement and leaves, running into the projectionist's bed. She has finally taken control of her life. Question mark? The projectionist sees a change in Pearl, however, and he rejects her idea to run away together. So she murders him, then her mother, then her father. And all that's left now to do is audition, get her big break, and become a star. But that's just not the world we live in, is it? Pearl doesn't get her big break. She's doomed to live her life out on the quaint little farm with her adoring husband Howard, smiling her way through her beautiful life. This is Pearl, directed by Ty West, written by Ty West and Mia Goth.
All right. This movie is not shot in 4:3.
No.
This one is actually shot in anamorphic, which it's a form of widescreen. Anamorphic actually means that it's you basically condense the image and then you expand it again in post. It creates this little halo-y effect. It like distorts the edges of the frame a bit. That's what anamorphic means, and it's widescreen. And it's also shot to emulate like a Technicolor was an early use of color during like it started in the 30s with movies like Snow White, Gone with the Wind, Wizard of Oz, Becky Sharp. Those were the Technicolor movies, which was their early way of making color film. And this one, it's not shot on Technicolor because it's not shot in film, but it is made to emulate that. Why?
Well, it could be as simple as because Ty West did what the fuck he wanted to do.
Podcast over. It's because Ty West did what he wanted to do.
It's a
Roll credits.
choice.
On to the bone reviews.
It's a choice, and he runs with it because there are tons of callbacks to Wizard of Oz and Judy Garland in particular. Okay, so this could be fun if we just like list off all the Wizard of Oz references that we caught because there are a lot.
There's so many.
But yeah, like obviously the Scarecrow.
Yep,
Yeah.
she's riding a bike like the Wicked Witch
He's
of the
riding a
West.
bike with the wicker basket or
Yep.
whatever connected,
Mhm.
but no dog, which just reinforces her isolation and loneliness.
They
Yeah.
don't have a dog.
We don't have a dog.
That is actually like a line in the movie. It's not just like there isn't a dog. It's they mention that there's not a dog.
Yeah.
To be clear.
She's a
Pigtails.
pigtail. She's a farm girl. The very opening shot is like when they open onto the land of Oz.
Yeah, 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 yeah. The opening of the doors. I think X
The
Yeah.
opened the same way,
It
right?
did. It
like the
did.
track in or
Mm,
is it a dolly in? But like with the doors opening onto
yeah.
the colorful landscape.
When it all turns into color, yeah.
I think even the title font they use is similar to The Wizard of Oz.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. The projectionist is like the man behind the curtain, right?
Literally.
And then he's also a traveler. So just like Professor Marvel, who is this traveling, mystic or whatever that she meets.
Right.
Blonde girl Mitzi is Mitzi a Glinda reference? Am I just being racist against blondes?
Are blondes a race?
I was really thinking of like who would Mitzi represent, and then this is like a stretch. It's so silly, but I'm like, well, she chickens out initially from the audition, right? She's like, "Oh, you
Mm,
go ahead. I can't do it."
Yeah.
And then, but then she gets it, and then she lies about it later
we
on,
don't
or
know
tries to.
that.
Well, I mean, that's true. She could have just been saying that to get out, but I do think that she got it because she fit their description, and it made sense that she wouldn't want to make Pearl feel bad because she really cared about her.
We don't see any other blondes in line for the audition, although there could be more people that we don't see in that lineup. I mean, would she even know if she got it at that point? Like, would they tell her? Would they say, "Oh, you might get called from us"?
It wasn't a professional kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like for Pearl, they pulled like a Randy Jackson on her, or like it's gonna be a no for me, dog. Like they just
Yeah.
they like it wasn't like, oh, we'll let you know, thank you for your time. They just tell
Yeah.
you, they just told her right there, oh, it's gonna be a pass.
But if they
Harsh.
had given Mitzi the part on the spot, then would they continue seeing the rest of the people, or would they go outside and say, "It's all good, everyone can go home, the part's taken"?
Yeah, I don't know. I would argue, do we even know if Mitzi auditioned? Because we don't ever see her go in, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Because I agree. I
There's a
think
lot of
like
assumptions going on here.
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I agree that if because she's blonde that she would have gotten the part, but I also like from her performance don't think that she got the part and that she is trying to back away.
I
Okay,
think she's a
fair.
bad liar.
There you
Yeah.
go. It still works because she's a cowardly lion.
Oh, that's the
Anyway,
reference.
like I said, it's a stretch. But the thing about Judy Garland is that Judy Garland stars in A Star Is Born, right?
Yep.
Mhm.
Pearl goes to watch Palace Follies.
Mhm.
Judy Garland also starred in a film called Ziegfeld Follies, and her character's name was The Star.
Mm.
I think these are not coincidences.
All those
you know,
Follies movies are connected also, right? Like, I never saw any of the Follies movies, but I think they're all, like, a thing that they would do every year.
It's a style of film. It's
Yeah.
like a vaudeville show that they film.
Yeah.
Ziegfeld is a specific person that,
Yes.
like a theater troupe, and yeah, I mean, there's a direct correlation. I think for me, and this does tie into the cinematography, actually. So going full circle here, Judy Garland, yeah, where you're getting at, Joe, is like, was this big star that people idolized? She was a little girl who like became a big star, and I think like the way that the studio system worked was really pushing this ideology to young women, which is like anyone can become a star. Oh, we just plucked Marilyn Monroe from, the airplane assembly line because she did a couple of pictures. It's like this idealization of Hollywood, which I think feeds into the reason why Ty West chose this specific style for the cinematography and for
Yeah.
the design of the film. Specifically, what we're getting at here is the film, takes place in 1918, but the style of the film is 1930s and a little into the 40s as well, which doesn't correlate. I think it's because of the hope that Ty
Yeah.
West really wants to show that Pearl has for this idealized Hollywood, this idealized life of glamour. I think the 1930s does it really well with the Technicolor, with the bright colors, with this showmanship. I mean, the dance, musicals. It is an exciting
Yeah.
world, which is not the one that she is currently living in.
It might even be, like, a little bit for us that he went with a different time period's aesthetic, because if you did the aesthetic of 1910s, then, it's silent
True.
era, it's like a blocked-in frame, it's black and white, it wouldn't look glamorous. I love that style, but it's not something that we would currently that a modern society would be associating with glamour, even though that's how Pearl is seeing it. So in order to glamorize that, you need to go to a later era.
Totally. They actually thought about doing 19 teens or the
Really?
teens, German expressionism.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Could you
Oh,
imagine?
wow. But
I
and
want to see
going
that.
German expressionism specifically, that's so interesting because there's, like, this interplay in the movie with Pearl and her German heritage, where, like, her mother is clearly German, her parents come from Germany, and her mother still speaks German. Pearl does not say a word in German until the end of the movie when she has accepted her place, when she's accepted that she will not be a star. There's a little pseudo fantasy piece where it's her coddling her mother and says "I love you" in German. Up until that point, she is fully rejecting her German heritage. She has a Southern accent, not a German accent. She married a wealthy American who runs off to war to fight Germans. It's such a interesting dichotomy. So if they had shot the movie in German expressionism, that would, like, highlight completely different themes. I feel like that would almost de-glamorize it. It would ground you in, like, she wants all this, but that's not what her life is. And this is what her life is German expressionism.
I didn't think of this before until we started talking about cinematography, but is there a possibility that Pearl is a flashback because it is the second film coming after X,
Mm.
and that, the movie is through Pearl's POV, but is there a way that it's through older Pearl's POV so that in a way the 1930s could have existed and she wants to see it through that lens?
I like that. I like that. They do have an X for her mark in theater, which, I mean, in modern film, that's not how marks actually look. So I took that as a little dramatic license, but I don't actually know what it would have been in that place and time period. And for an unprofessional theater, it's a church group, but the X marks the spot might be a little bit of dramatic license to make it go ha ha, it's X, but also does fit the moment because that's when, like, her dreams are about to fall apart, so it kind of makes sense in that moment to recall, like, "Oh, yeah, she's going to flop because we know where this is going."
Yeah. Well, so when she got to that mark on the X, did you think that she was gonna flop? Was that your read up into the first time you saw this? Did you think she was actually talented?
Well, I'd seen X. Joe, I've been talking, what do you think?
Well, she lives in such a fantasy world, and a lot of that is all we ever see. So it didn't seem out of the realm of possibility that she could give a great audition and land the gig. Obviously, that's not what happens, but I think we're supposed to hang on to this optimism for as long as we can as an audience member. We're supposed to have hope until there is none.
Exactly. I think it says a lot that the reason why she doesn't get the part isn't because she's a bad dancer and isn't because she's a good dancer. It's because they just want someone else's looks.
Would they tell her? Would they be honest,
Well,
though?
that's the thing. That's the thing. I think it's very reflective of what the themes are and what Ty West is trying to say with this film and Mia Goth is trying to say with this film.
Mm.
It's like it it doesn't matter if she's a good dancer or not. We can believe everything that we want. The facts of life and the way that life works and the way that this industry works that is just gonna cut you down in the end and keep you on the farm.
That said, she did not rehearse at all for this audition. Just to be clear, she was much busier, like, murdering a whole bunch of people and really did not prepare. So, that opening shot when it's like wide in the beginning of her audition and her expression changes and she starts to dance, she's like fine. And then she gets really good, but also becomes like very clearly a fantasy sequence. So I err on the side that she is probably fine, but all the amazing moves we're seeing are fantasy. Like, I mean, obviously, she does not have a million background dancers and she is not in Europe and there are no explosions behind her.
You mean the fireworks. The fireworks
Yeah.
are the explosions, David.
It's very interesting that her fantasy world goes into the war. That's such a
Yeah.
fascinating choice. How do you guys read that?
I think that she's so singularly focused on escaping from this life, and she has a couple of tickets that she's hoping to cash in. One is Howard. So she's really concerned about what's going on in the war because she's wondering when Howard's coming back. Oh, is this signal the end of the war? That's not because she's happy for world peace. She's happy because that means that Howard could come back sooner and take her away. Same thing with saying grace at the table and praying to God.
Mm,
She prays to God because that's another ticket, out. Like, oh,
Mhm.
please God, take me away from this place. And then that ties in perfectly that the audition is at a church,
yep.
Yeah.
and that's kind of where she stops ever like praying, or she loses her attachment to the church because it was never about anything more than this is another possible ticket out of this place.
It feels like God
It
himself is judging her.
yeah, it really does.
She prayed to God, so now he has come to judge.
He doesn't answer my prayers like he answers yours. Yeah, I love that read. And then I'm just gonna go on a roundabout way to answer your question, David, but I promise I'll get there. I want to talk about Howard for a second because he's not like David said, he's not really a presence in this film, but people talk about him. So we learn a lot about Howard's backstory. He's grown up wealthy or well off. He's not necessarily happy with the life that is given to him, and he searches for something more. Very relatable to young Pearl. So he becomes a farmhand on Pearl's farm, and Pearl takes a liking to him for some one reason or another because she thinks that he can also take her away from the life that she has because he has the wealth and the ability to do so. And then he chooses to go away yet again to the war. I mean, Mitzi says, I don't know why he went. We had the opportunity to get him out of that, but he chose to go because he had this responsibility or whatever. So Howard is like Pearl in that he's constantly trying to find a way to get away, and he's presented all these different opportunities. The difference is that he can take them. And the reason why I see Pearl dancing to the war in the background is that, the war was Howard's opportunity to escape the life that he was
Mm.
given. And Pearl thinks the dance will be her opportunity to do that.
I like that. We see war imagery, and I feel like it's easy to bring in our own thoughts on war, which is further complicated because it's World War I, which my understanding, the colloquial understanding, is that it's a war that happened because everyone was allied with each other, and it was a relatively small conflict, just got blown up to a massive scale. So it's almost like a completely pointless war and just pointless death and destruction. But to Pearl, that doesn't really matter. She's not thinking about world peace like you said, Joe. She's just like, "Oh, it's a war. That's a thing that exists in the world." And she doesn't really consider it beyond that.
When she's talking to Mitzi, she's like, "Oh, I wanna go to Europe, like, I wanna experience life," and Mitzi's like, "Okay, good luck finding anything in Europe, like, everything's destroyed. There's a war going on."
And that was all decided because one time Mr. Superman, the projectionist has been cast as Superman, so I'm gonna call him Superman. Superman told her the porn industry you can make them in Europe, so that's like, oh, there are movies happening in Europe, so that's why she wants to go to Europe.
There is a fantasization of European culture, and specifically around this time too, and, the projectionist calls himself Bohemian, and that was kind of what the Bohemian culture was bringing over the what seemed like free-flowing conversations around art and ideas. That was kind of built into this Bohemian lifestyle, as well as this huge independence, which I feel like is very thematic. The Bohemians specifically in Greenwich Village, but the Bohemian culture was a huge movement for from like 1840s all the way. I mean,
Yeah.
they got revived in the 80s. That, like, you didn't have to rely on the government structure, that you could live with one another, that you could support one another, that you could all live in the same house and just, like, kinda do whatever you want or call nowhere your home like the projectionist does. It's this certain lifestyle of independence.
It's also a reference to X when Howard kills Kid Cudi. He accuses Kid Cudi of trying to seduce Pearl and refers to him as a bohemian, which I
Yes.
love because it just shows that, like, this trauma when Howard found out about his wife's affair has just rippled through his entire life, and now he hates all these fucking bohemians because they're always trying to have sex with his wife and steal her away from him. It's like this little bit of insecurity that he has that Pearl might be happier with someone less connected to a specific place and more just living in the moment, living an artistic
Right.
lifestyle, and that's what she really wants. And it's this insecurity from Howard that he can't give that to her.
Or that he doesn't have it himself,
Yeah.
right? Like, beyond the he can't give it to her, that he might have also wanted that life at one point.
Yeah.
You mentioned porn. Sorry. This is the segue. What do you think the importance of sexuality was in this film, specifically for Pearl?
Well, Pearl is very horny.
She lonely. Wouldn't you be?
In this time period, a sexually active woman was not seen as something that was supposed to be. So the fact that Pearl has all these sexual fantasies and she comes from a religious German family who are like trying to have a humble life on a farm, like, of course she hates that. And of course they think there's something wrong with her because she is sexual and sex is normal. She doesn't really find a healthy outlet for her sexuality, but, like, there's nothing inherently wrong with her actual sexuality itself. Maybe you shouldn't fuck your neighbor's scarecrow. Maybe you should just get a dildo.
Don't kink shame, David.
Well, then get your own scarecrow. I like that she continues to wear the scarecrow's top hat throughout the movie. Like, to me,
Yeah.
that almost becomes this, like, symbol of that scene, that symbol of her fantasy, of her, like, owning her sexuality, of her owning her
Mhm.
kinkiness. She goes on to be, like, a serial rapist, right? Like, that's what winds up happening.
Oh, and X?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't remember as well. The top hat is interesting because, like, I always associate the top hat with, like, the wealthy class, like, it was like a
Yeah.
dress-up clothes, and so it's so interesting to see the top hat on a scarecrow of all things,
Mm,
and then, yeah, it being tossed around.
It was also like they used it to refer to illness and sickness
that's
and
true.
it not being allowed back in the house because the last time it was there, it crippled her husband. The way Pearl brings it in secret back into the home and hides it was like the ultimate betrayal to her to her mother.
Wait, what crippled the husband?
Sickness, like, there's the
Yeah,
whole, like,
yeah.
Spanish influenza and
Yes.
that they talk about and everything, and this is such a COVID film, like, I
Yep.
totally forgot, like, I mean, I it's all over the film.
The screenplay was written while Ty West and I think Mia Goth as well were quarantining. I don't think because they had COVID. I think just because at that point in time the filming restrictions were you had to quarantine after flying. So they were doing their quarantine before filming X, and they wrote the script in that time.
There's the whole thing of, like, "Oh, like, go quarantine yourself now, and hopefully all you have in your hair are flies."
It's like she's holding on to this symbol of what could be, of her hopes, her fantasies, her future as a star. All of these are in this top hat. But then her mother says, "Oh, but that will bring you the Spanish flu. You can't dream when there is an illness going around. You're not
Yeah.
allowed to dream in this time."
And let's talk about the mother for a second because that scene when the 2 of them are fighting is I
Brutal.
think such a strong, yeah, brutal scene. I think that's a great way to describe it. It starts, I think, this arc of the mother. I mean, we see her as a villain up until the point where we see her cry, and then we really start to get this humanistic story of why. why her mother is so harsh and why she's treating Pearl in this very specific way, and we see a kindrence in their storylines that, the mother once had dreams as well or a life as well, and then life restricted her to, you know, not being the wife of her husband, but the mother of her husband and having to take care of him. Talk to me a little bit about what your read of the mother was in this film.
I got the feeling that in happier times, the mother was a dancer or
Right?
wanted to be a dancer.
Oh.
In the very beginning of the film, you see a couple of different like family photo frames, and there's an old black and white one of a woman like in a dancing pose right next to a picture of like the three of them, and it's just like, yeah, with all the dresses that Pearl keeps taking from her closet, and it was like, and these are from her life before it went to shit. And like, yeah, I don't know, like I feel like she inherited this love for dance and everything through her mother. I feel like the mother was did have a love for dancing, but now sees anything that's self-serving to be selfish, and is impossible to enjoy anymore.
Yeah. There's definitely an extreme there.
It's almost like the mother is an older version of Pearl herself.
Yep.
And Pearl even says, I just don't want to become like you.
And like completely conflicting philosophy with the projectionist, right?
Mm.
Carlos presented with these two different philosophies. One is you're only young once, you can do anything, you can achieve anything if you want it badly enough. And the mother is like, you just make the most of what you have, and to want more is to be selfish.
It's so weird to me that the mother is like to want this is so abhorrent because her mother's an immigrant and her mother says this that she came to America for a better life. Her mother wanted something and she got the opportunity to do something about it and to like go chase that better life. Yet Pearl wants to go chase a better life and her mother says, "Nah, you're not allowed to do that. Like, what we gave you is good enough. You shouldn't have to want more." There's, like, a dark irony there of, like, "Well, why do you get to go do that, and then I
Yeah.
don't?" Like, I get that there's probably a protective nature there of, like, "Well, life is too harsh. I don't want you to, like, go find that out. This farm life is, like, actually really nice, and you'll find out that it is the best one you can live." Maybe, but it is very restrictive.
Do you think mom regrets coming to America?
With the war going on? No.
There was a lot of discrimination against Germans in this time, which she talks about in the movie. There were a lot of boycotts. In some places, you weren't allowed to speak German in public. And
Mm.
up until that point, there had been a booming German culture, which basically just vanished during the years of World War One. People burned books that were in the German language. They shut down German churches. Yeah, it was like intense.
Yeah, and I'm not sure, like, what how people treated her for being German before that, but we do see that, they did have a successful life on the farm, shown through
Yes.
the dresses, as Joe mentioned. They're nice clothes that her mother doesn't wear anymore. As mentioned through Pearl's story, they had farm hands, they had a lot more animals, they seemed to be better off, and then either the war happened and then the father got sick. Like, I don't know we don't know which one came first, but
Mm,
both of them definitely put pressure and restraint on the family.
yeah.
I think there was a devastating spread of the flu on their farm, and I think a lot of farmhands probably got really sick or died as well. And it ravaged maybe even crops. I mean, like I feel like there was like a really devastating moment that ruined their whole livelihood.
Did the Spanish flu affect crops?
No idea.
It's a
I
great question.
don't know either.
Animals probably, though.
Pearl does tell the projectionist that we used to have a lot of more animals, but they all died.
Oh, okay. Probably the dad was likely the main worker on the farm, just considering gender roles in this time. And then with
Right.
his becoming some sort of Parkinson's or something like that, like he can't move or speak, that work transferred to the mother and to Pearl. They're kind of doing man's work despite being women.
Well, and they can't even do man's work, which is a big thing. Like, they can't just step in and earn what the father was earning, you know? Like there is an imbalance there because you would think, yeah, the mom can just continue on the work, but she can't, and they're not living life the way that they used to.
Well, the mother seems to blame that on discrimination. She says that's because people are boycotting them, that they don't want to buy German crops, which I think is believable. It might be a mix of those. She might not want to admit that there's other issues.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a lot going on there.
So speaking of the mom, we can start comparing the movies now. There is because the mom is a little bit of an analog with Jesse in My Heart Can't Beat, that they both have that controlling nature to them where they're restricting the main protagonists. Do we think we've beat around the word abuse a bit? Do you guys would you consider these relationships abusive in both movies?
And in ways, I would have to say yes, because as bad as their situations are, and I think Devin brought this up earlier, like it does feel like you could maneuver in other ways within these circumstances. Things weren't so black and white that you could only turn to these particular solutions. Like there's no reason why Jesse needed to be so mean and controlling, and there's no reason why Pearl's mother couldn't at least want something better for her daughter. Like, yeah, great, you shouldn't want to end up like me. I don't want this fate for you. I want something better for you, and let her chase a better life. Like it does come down to some sort of abuse that's born out of disappointment in their own life, taken out on their family members.
I agree. I think, yes, I agree it's abusive because it is causing harm in the long run. But both of these films do give us, as Joe said, the reason and for the abuse. Like it does make us understand the abuser more. Not to necessarily a point. I don't agree with like we feel empathy for the abuser. Well, or sympathy for the abuser, but we can definitely empathize with the abuser. Am I doing that right? I always feel like I mix up sympathize and empathize.
To me, sympathize means that you understand their point and not necessarily agree with them, but it's a little closer to that. It's more like I can see where you're coming from. Empathize is less rational and more emotional. It's more I am able to put myself in your shoes. That's how I use them.
Okay, I thought they were the opposite. Well, you understand what I'm saying there, though. At least there's that.
Well, I think Jesse's a little bit empathetic. I don't think Pearl's mom is, but she's sympathetic. Like I can see where she's coming from. I mean, for me, the part where Pearl's mom pushes into like, oh, this is really, really unhealthy abuse, and not just like, oh, you're a little strict, is also when she like takes the knife to her husband's throat, and she's like, would it be easier if I just killed him? Is this what you want? And I'm just like, yo, this poor dude, like he can't move or speak, but like his brain seems to still be working. I think he understands everything that's happening, and his wife is just holding a knife to his throat and talking about killing him. Like that is fucking abuse. You are absolutely abusing that guy. Pearl abused him too. She's always taking baths in front of him, which is very weird. He is not consenting to watching his daughter naked and then like pinching him. Like she gets weirdly close with him at times, and she seems to be doing it just to make him uncomfortable and to see if it will elicit some reaction. Like there's definitely elder abuse at play here. My Heart Can't Beat, you could also say that they're abusive toward Thomas, that they won't let him out. That's horrible. Like
Yep.
Jesse's arguably abusive toward Dwight, but I think that they're also arguably abusive toward Thomas. Obviously, calling him stupid is abuse. And just restricting his access to the outside world, restricting his ability to understand the outside world. We didn't mention that they have Christmas every month. That's like,
Yeah.
I mean, that's not abuse. That's almost sweet, but it's also just kind of sad. Like they've replaced his independence with themselves.
Yeah. It's kind of a controlling nature.
Yeah.
You need to give perks in order to work someone so hard. It's like you got to give them positives so that they will keep feeding into it. It's like cult behavior, right? Or
Yeah.
it's like startup behavior.
I agree with that. I saw it as like Thomas being like terminally ill and they know that he doesn't have a long time to live. So we're going to give him Christmas every month and make sure he gets to experience as many Christmases as possible, kind of thing, because he was so sick. And they knew deep down that they weren't going to be able to keep up this facade for so long. At any point, any one of these kills was going to get them caught and taken away.
Which makes you question again why they are doing this at all. If it's destined to end that way, one way or the other, then should they? I mean, obviously, murder is bad.
I think they just understood that there was no guarantee that they were going to be able to keep up this ruse forever. So
Yeah,
just in case it all went to shit, they made sure that like he got to like experience a lot of Christmases. And
So then, why are they still holding on? I guess is what I'm asking. Why are they going so far out of their way to keep it going if they accept that it's going to end?
because they need it too.
not that they're accepting that it's going to end. So I use terminal, but like I think they just the what they were doing could easily get them into trouble at any
Yes,
point. And because there was no guarantee that this was gonna last forever, that they would do little things in the meanwhile that could soften the blow if things crumbled.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's like he lives a very like terrible existence. Like
Yeah,
he says, I don't want to live like this. If we're gonna keep these rules in place where like I can never go out, I can't have friends, my heart can't beat unless you tell it to. That's He's only alive because his siblings want him to be.
And you could interchange that Thomas there with Pearl, right? Pearl is also feeling this dread of loneliness and is tied to her family and only can take care of her family. I mean, there's a beautiful moment when they're at the dinner table and Pearl's about to take a bite of corn, or she takes one bite of corn and her mother's like, "Help your father first." Like Pearl can't even eat without having to take care of somebody else or to do something with her family. They're both trapped in this life that they didn't necessarily choose, but now that they're completely tied to.
I'm gonna throw in a big word. The big word is codependency. Basically, it's depicting a type of abusive relationship where you are a caretaker for someone. Originally, this term came about from people in relationships with alcoholics, but it has been expanded since then to involve other things, including chronic mental or physical illnesses. And some of the characteristics of codependent people, there is an exaggerated sense of responsibility for the actions of others. I'm literally reading this off a link. A tendency to confuse love and pity with the tendency to love people that they can pity and rescue, a tendency to do more than their share, a tendency to become hurt when people don't recognize their efforts, an unhealthy dependence on relationships, an extreme need for approval and recognition, a sense of guilt when asserting themselves, a compelling need to control others happens sometimes, lack of trust in yourself and others, fear of being abandoned, fear of being alone, difficulty identifying your feelings, rigidity, difficulty adjusting to change, problems with intimacy and boundaries, chronic anger, lying, dishonesty, poor communications, difficulty making decisions. Basically, what this all sums up to is that you take your entire identity and you place it on your relationship with this other person and in making sure that they're okay, and you deny yourself your own identity as a result of that.
Mhm. And not all the time, just to specify, not all the time is it someone who's sick or unable to do something. Sometimes it is just a
Yes.
person that you wanna take care of.
And we'll have resources for this in the link, by the way.
Thank
I
you.
hope none of our listeners are in a codependent relationship, but if you are, then there will be links.
Yeah, I Googled this and Google was like, "Hey, here's a link to where you need to go if you're suffering from this." I'm like, "Thank you, Google. I've never seen you do that before."
I'm like, thank you, Google. I'm not in a relationship.
Everything you just said, I think, perfectly describes our characters in both of these films, right? And it clearly is the discussion presented in both movies, but I think, like, the opposite spectrum is also presented, at the end of both films. So we see Dwight getting the opposite of codependence, which would be his independence. He's alone, but we do question, did he take it too far is he going to be unhappy or happy? And the same thing with Pearl, like, she finds her complete independence by murdering everybody that got in her way, and we question, did she take it too far? Is she going to be happy or unhappy?
Well, Pearl just enters a new codependent relationship with Howard,
Fair.
and Howard becomes codependent on her, that he is now luring men in for Pearl to rape and murder, as we see in X. His entire life comes to revolve around her after this brief stint during the movie Pearl when he is trying to explore the world. They both wind up stuck on this farm. The farm itself is the codependency. The farm is the relationship. In My Heart Can't Beat, both Dwight and Jesse are codependent on Thomas,
Mhm.
but Thomas is also kind of codependent on them, and Dwight and Jesse are also kind of codependent with each other. There's a part where Jesse tells Dwight, like, "You can't leave, we need you here." But then, like, when he is reluctant to do hunting, she just does it all herself. So it's like, why do you need him here? It's just because she doesn't want to be alone. It's just because she
Yeah.
wants to have him there. And in Pearl, like, yeah, Pearl and her mom are both codependent with the dad, that they've revolved their entire identities around there. But also, I think what we see in both movies is that Jesse and Pearl's mom are both fully in this codependent relationship. This is our lives. We cannot do anything else. This is our responsibility.
Right, they accept their responsibility.
Yes. And it's Dwight and Pearl who want to get out, who they recognize that this is not healthy and they are trying to figure out how to leave. And as for whether Dwight will be okay at the end, I mean, there are resources to help people who have escaped a relationship like this to help them not repeat the pattern because it can be chronic. It's called relationship addiction. So there are resources to help people break out of that, to figure out what sort of, a lot of the time it's some childhood trauma. It's the dynamic that you have with your family that you're repeating. He could potentially get that, but also he probably can't because he killed people. It's hard to get help when getting help means admitting that you did crimes.
Yeah. It's so true.
His happiest ending is if he turns himself in, honestly, and then he can get help.
Well, so there's a term in psychology which is a balance between the independence and the codependence, which is interdependence. And I feel like there is a balance that Dwight could have achieved. Pearl is a different story altogether. I do believe that for Dwight and Thomas and Jesse to live happily, Jesse did have to go, unfortunately.
Hmm.
But I still feel like there could have been a fairy tale ending with Dwight and Thomas. Though as we did talk about, Thomas may be too far gone into not being able to learn some certain social interactions in order to be able to be more independent, but we don't know. I mean, they could have tried.
I think I disagree. I think Thomas, because Thomas's condition is supernatural. Like Thomas, the vampires aren't real, but he is a
What?
vampire.
Huh?
Yes, that's right, Joe. Vampires aren't real.
Are you shitting me?
He needs people to die in order for himself to live. That's kind of hard to break out of. Even if it had been possible to get Thomas help elsewhere, to put him in like a home for vampires or something, I don't know. I don't want to say that Jessie is too far gone. I think that she is herself in this codependent relationship. I think that she does not recognize it, but she could get to a place where she would recognize it and get help. Like, you can get help.
To clarify, I just don't see it happening where both she and Dwight are able to get out and still be in a relationship as brother and sister.
As in that they wouldn't. Yeah, it would be. Yeah, they would need boundaries. They would need massive boundaries.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is I don't think that's possible, and I think Dwight needs to get away from Jesse, and
Yeah,
Jesse
okay.
needs to be out of that in order for them
Yeah, okay, okay. I
to hit a
understand
healthy
now.
lifestyle. Yeah.
Yes. These movies are sad.
Yeah.
I guess Pearl is also funny. So at least there's that.
Oh, I didn't find it funny. I found it really heartbreaking.
Well, let's talk about that in our bone review section where we rate each movies on a scale of 1 to 4 bones. It's Rob's favorite part of the show. Did you guys know that there's actually a such thing as a cadaver bone?
I don't understand how that's a What?
We named the bone reviews because, like, we're dogs because it's cadaver dogs, but a cadaver bone is actually a thing, and it's not what you think it is. It is when someone needs a bone transplant, the cadaver bone is the bone that
Ew.
they take out of the dead body to put in the person who needs the bone. So then you
Ew.
have a cadaver bone.
Okay, thanks for that, David.
It's like a bone donation as opposed to organ
Yeah.
donation.
So we can figure out how many cadaver bones were given these movies. Starting us off with My Heart Can't Beat Unless You Tell It To is Devin Shepard.
I love this movie. I am so happy that David made me watch it the first time around, because David watched it and then immediately was like, "Oh my god, you need to see this movie." Yeah, it's a quiet, beautiful film that is really dreary, but in, like, such a good way. I love that it's neo-Gothic, as we have now coined that term. The cinematography is fucking fantastic. I feel like we touched on so much for this film, but I feel like there's so much more there that we could actually talk about, and that's the kind of movie that I love the most. The characters are beautiful. The performances I think are incredible. You can tell there's a lot of heart that went into this film from the filmmakers, and I know they did touch on a lot of personal stuff, and it shows. I had not really too many bad things to say about this movie, though I do find some issues. It is slow, but not to the point where like it bothers me. And as I watch it more and more, I don't mind the slowness at all. Jesse's character, I'm still noodling with on how I feel about how she's presented. So I can't give it a full four. I think I will give it 3.5 bones. Still really high. Joe, what is your I don't want to call it a cadaver bone rating now, but what is your bone rating? Ew,
I
cadaver bones.
don't know. I kind of like the cadaver bone explanation. I mean, it makes sense, and it can help some people out. I mean,
Of course, our bone ratings are all taken from dead bodies. That's what all the bones that we're given come from.
am I gonna die?
No, they're cadavers. They're already dead. But also, yes, we're all gonna die.
Yeah, I really love the grounded nature of the way they treat vampire mythology, and I also really appreciate a good like sibling film presented with really complex emotions. There are moments where I wish the film went harder or showed a little more. Like I didn't need to see Thomas like engulfed in flames, but I kind of did want to see Thomas engulfed in flames. And we get that in Pearl in a very different way, but I think the movie flirts with brutality and doesn't fully commit, and I kind of wanted there to be a little bit more savagery, but that's just my weird we talk about how like sad these movies are or whatever, and it's like that's my shit. Like I want like to be wrecked. I want you to just fuck me up. So I like to see crazy shit. That's no like actual fault on the movie, but it left me wanting a little bit more, and I'll be honest about that. But it's a great addition to the vampire canon. Really, really strong performances, and I'm gonna go three cadaver bones.
Nice. I really like that it doesn't show a lot. Like, I definitely didn't need to see Thomas engulfed in flames. I'm sorry. I feel like that would have taken away from it. The movie is so interested in de-glamorizing the vampire and in sort of de-glamorizing these murders, and I think that that is the effect of not lingering on all the violence or giving special shots to the violence, that it all just kind of happens and it's very abrupt. Like a shot just is going and then there is violence and it doesn't cut away to some other shot. It doesn't get you the most interesting angle. It doesn't do close-up inserts of the gore or whatever. The violence just happens. And I think that that works with the vibe of the film, that it feels more real as a result of that. It feels sadder as a result of that. And it would be less sad if it was more cinematically fied. And I like Jesse's character too, because you need a villain. And she's kind of the villain. Kind of. They're all kind of villains. They're all kind of not villains. But of the three of them, she is the most antagonistic one. And definitely all three characters bring something different to the table that you can't cut any of these three characters. and you don't need any more. It is the perfect balance between the three of them. I love this movie. It's gorgeous. 4:3 is the superior aspect ratio. I'm gonna go 3.5 bones. It was between 3 and 3.5, but the more I think about this movie, the more I love it. So I'm going 3.5. Devin, what'd you think of Pearl?
I fucking love this movie. I loved it so much when I first saw it. I was a little worried to watch it again and have it, like, not be as good. It's still just so fucking good. There's nothing like it. It's so unique. Mia Goth, I love, obviously, great performance, but so does everybody else in this movie. Really, like, undersold performances, I feel like. The cinematography is tops. The screenwriting is tops. I love that, like, on this read, there was so much more there that I didn't get the first time. And in fact, like so many things that like I thought I understood the first time and then were actually completely different the second time I watched it. So much rewatchability there. I don't know what else I can really, like, add to the conversation because I feel like Pearl is just such a beloved film in the genre, and for all the reasons that everyone else always says is why I love it as well. I think we didn't get to touch on it as much as would have helped for the conversation that we had today, but I think there is so much there to be said about the female experience that I would love to spend hours diving in on, and I think the film does beautifully. It's so much gorier than I remember it being. I completely forgot that, like, we reached the end of the film. I'm like, "Okay, that's it. I can just start getting my notes together now and turning it off." Oh, no. This whole entire sequence is just, like, chopping up bodies and blood spewing everywhere. Love that Ty West gradually brought in the violence to match up to the level that came with X, and I love the shock value of all of it. It's a four-bone movie for me, hands down. Joe, what about you?
Yeah, I love how twisted and kooky and violent the film is. It's an absolute showcase for Mia Goth. That reaction at the end of the, failed audition, she's just like crying in tears, I'm a star. It's just iconic. It's the best. I said behind the scenes that my star rating for Pearl went up on this rewatch. It played better for me on the rewatch. It's great. I'm going 3.5, but it's so close to a 4. It's so close.
All right, David. Or are you also in the high bone camp?
Yeah, I'm in the same camp. I mean, remember, I put this as my number one on that top of the year list. It's funny because you were just saying how you don't think the movie's funny at all, but the thing that most stood out to me on this rewatch that I had forgotten was how funny the movie is. Like, it's funny just in this weird disconnect and, like, I guess dramatic irony, kind of all the violence coupled with the, like, gorgeous, beautiful way that it's shot and like how glamorous everything is, but then it's also like really violent, and you just have this like pig rotting throughout the movie. And you just see all the maggots crawling all over it. It's super fucking disgusting. And you know that final shot of her smiling for so fucking long is like so weird and disturbing and funny and like all at once. I mean, it's obviously, I think, again, a little bit fantastical. Like, Howard must have said something, or maybe she really did just hold it for that long. I'm gonna say she held it for that long because that's better. But any comedic element goes away when she starts on this long, long monologue. Not right away, because in the first part of it, it's so abrupt and weird when it's like, "Oh, I can say anything. Okay, I hope Howard dies," and you just see Mitzi's reaction, like, "What the fuck?" But then they stop cutting to Mitzi and they just hold on Pearl monologuing and just describing this entire rich and strange inner life and the completely different way that she sees the world, and she knows that she sees the world differently. And it's like there's this tragedy in how she understands that she is not like other people but still cannot make herself be like other people. It dares you to keep watching her, and it dares you to put yourself in her place and imagine what she's going through. I'm giving it 3.5 bones, and I'm excited for Maxine, which will hopefully also be this good.
Well, that was a high bone reading session. Sorry we went a little bit over today, but these both of these films were obviously so much fun to talk about, and obviously we could keep talking about them. But I wanted to thank our guest, Joseph. Well, I want to call you Joe, and then it says Joseph, and it
Oh
gets
no,
like
it's
stuck in my
fine.
head.
Joe is like a a term of endearment, I feel like, from friends. Like,
Aw.
you meet me as Joseph, but once you start calling me Joe, that tells me that, oh, you feel closer to me. You feel like we're friends. So like I love that too.
I hate to burst your bubble, Joe, but I think I was introduced to you as Joe.
I didn't introduce myself to you. That's probably what it was.
Well, then, for our listeners, I want to thank Joseph Hernandez, again, who is an actor, filmmaker, programmer of Brooklyn Horror Film Festival, which we, of course, have mentioned, and South by Southwest, which is beginning this month, depending on when you listen to this episode. Thank you, Joe. It was so much fun to talk to you about these films. Please send our audience to wherever they can find you one more time.
Yeah, well, first of all, this was wonderful. You're both wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting me on. Please follow Brooklyn Horror Film Festival at brooklynhorrorfest.com and on all socials. Same thing with South by Southwest Film and TV Festival. A lot of exciting stuff going on right now with this year's edition. You can follow me at Official Joe Show on Instagram and Letterboxd. Thank you so much for having me on. This was lovely.
And we want to know what you thought of My Heart Can't Beat Unless You Tell It To and Pearl. Do you think that there are villains? Did we get this wrong? Is there abuse involved? Is Pearl a victim? Does she smile the whole time?
Does Jesse need to smile more?
Tweet at us or hit us up on Instagram at Cadaver Dogs Pod. And we are also on TikTok at Cadaver Dogs Podcast, as well as YouTube Cadaver Dogs Podcast. And that's our show for today. Thank you, Mutts.
Peace.
Live or die. Make your choice.
It's so good.
Game over.